Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist. I am the CEO and founder of Pro Audio Voices and Amplify Audiobooks, and also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association. And I wanted to invite onto the podcast today the rest of our executive team, Jerrilee Geist and Emily Busbee, to have a discussion about AI and how we are thinking about AI in the realm of audiobook production specifically. So Jerrilee and Emily, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Jerrilee is our director of production. Emily is our director of marketing services. And I thought, we've been in this conversation for a while now, and certainly AI is the hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. It seems like every conference that I go to or event that I go to in the realm of publishing, it is the featured hot topic. But it's not often that people are weighing in those contexts in terms of how AI affects audiobooks. So I thought maybe we'd start, and Jerrilee, maybe you can start us off just in terms of one of the questions that has come up sometimes when people will reach out to us about audiobook production and they ask about AI narration. You want to share some of your thoughts about that and, maybe share some of what, the kinds of things that we've discussed.
Yeah. I guess I'll just start off by saying that we have decided as a company to not have AI narration on our platform, but there's still this sort of open question about distributing. We also distribute to a wide range of other retail platforms. So if someone is coming in with AI narration, do we help them distribute to other platforms, so there's this kind of it's a very interesting moral question, honestly, to me. I guess, what do we say if people are asking about it? First of all, we don't provide those services because I think the top reason is that we are really trying to support the other people in this industry. And that's mostly, we're mostly talking about narrators, professional narrators. It's a skill, just like acting, that I think that people, the skill of storytelling that I feel like is being overlooked a lot of the time in these AI conversations. Yeah. And when people are weighing the question, they're weighing things like price and like the pros and cons of working with another human, which, obviously when you're working with another human, can be complicated. You have to have you have to have back and forth, you have to think about the other person when, you don't, at least in our current world, you don't really need to think about how the AI feels and, how much, maybe how much the AI company is getting paid, which ends up being less. So anyway, the thing that we're really thinking about, talking about is I guess the storytelling aspect, that what is important, what is being lost with AI around storytelling.
Yeah. And the human impact, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Emily, maybe you could share some of, for our listeners, every year we have an annual retreat. And one of the things that we revisit is our core values. And so, we did that again. It was, I thought, a really interesting conversation, and even just the selection of the words that we're going to use to name the core value. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it is interesting because although we've been talking about AI for probably a couple years now, we weren't thinking about it super intently when we recreated our core values. but just naturally, they're in opposition to AI taking over real people. And I'll actually read out our core values here, at least the words. They spell create. So our core values, we really live by them as a company, and every decision we make, we want in alignment with them. And it's a community of real people we aim to empower through artistry and as a team to elevate. So that spells create. And the second one, R, is for real people. We've really struggled with our core values because we're like, what's the best word to like express how to be authentic? And authenticity really comes in alignment with that choosing of real people. There's just, you can't replace the human spirit. And even as AI improves, and yes, it's cheaper, but why is it cheaper? Like, why are we cutting humans out of art? Like, humans are art. Like, and we also look at the audiobook production process as a creative pursuit, not just like another checkbox to mark off. And I know a lot of authors maybe feel that burden of like, oh, I need an audiobook, I guess. Like people say I need it. Ugh, like it's another thing I need to do. How can I just do it as easily as possible? But in that process, are you forgetting why you wrote the book? You know, it was just speak to people's souls about this, that, or the other. Like you have a real human message. And I think those messages should be delivered by people to people. And that's the best way that we can have the impact from those words. So
yeah. And
it's tricky. It's hard for authors out there, but it's.
And a couple of things about what you said that I want to highlight. Like one is the wrestling with trying to find the right words to name our core values. It's like we're clear on what we really care about, but finding those exact right words. And this is the very struggle that authors deal with all the time, right? That is so much of the work itself is how do I take this idea, this thought, this emotion, and how do I express it with just the right words? So it feels very much like even that sort of wrestling match with the language itself is so in alignment with the work that we do. And then, yeah, the fact that And I think that the whole AI conversation, because it is, so big now, that while authenticity was the word that we were using to define it, in our conversation, it felt like we needed a new way to express that. And I know from my perspective, I feel very strongly like there's something that goes way beyond. You identified as like the human spirit, and I like that. Yeah, there's something, that sort of mysterious, conscious element of what we are as human beings. And it regardless of how much something, a voice might sound like you take two samples and maybe they sound very similar, but I just can't accept that there is not something lost, like what you were saying, Jerrilee. There's something really important that's lost when we just remove that human spirit.
I wanted to highlight also another one of our core values, which is artistry. Yeah. And I think something that was fascinating in our conversations was going back to like, what is artistry? And if AI is replacing us in art, like, what does that mean? And kind of like sitting with it for myself, it felt like, and I think you kind of said this too, Emily, but like art is human. It's like I think it is the human expression. It's like, and part of it is that struggle again, like Becky, you were saying, that when we are bringing in AI to take over our artistry, like, is that art?
Right.
I don't know.
It just sounds so dystopian to me. It's like so so wrong.
Yeah. And I guess it's like, in a way, it feels like it's devoid of the human spirit, which is like art is necessarily like infused with the human spirit, whatever that may be, and whether or not other people like it, that's not even really the point. It's like part of it is, the struggle to find words. And maybe I'm kind of dipping into the writing side of it now, but,
yeah. And we'll go into more of that, but go ahead, Emily.
Yeah. I was going to say that's the other piece of the question here is like, okay, can we produce an audiobook with a real human if the text was written by AI? Like now it's even weirder. like what is this? Because now they're not even expressing a human's expression. I don't know. What do we think about AI taking over the book writing process as well? We're usually at the back end of that. The book's done. We're ready to bring it to life. But can you even bring it to life properly if a human didn't fully write the story? I don't know.
Yeah. So I'd actually love it if we could circle back to that question because there's some other aspects of narration that I think come up frequently in the narration world. And so I think that we should address those because they don't come up so much in the publishing realm in general, but I think they're important to address. So one is narrators will sometimes, I've got a series of them. So one is that there's a lot of noise made about, now you can have the voice of somebody who is dead. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Legal? Is that legal? I mean, when you die, do you just sign away? I heard something recently, like James Earl Jones' voice being used, from Star Wars stuff like Darth Vader, but like being used in some other context, like using AI. I think in a video game, I'm not sure, but it was so bizarre, and he's saying things that like, he's not saying them, but now his voice is attached to these words that he didn't sign off on. The AI bot thing was saying all these offensive things. And it's like, what's the legal? Like, are there laws?
Well, there's so many lawsuits and, the legal profession and everyone's trying to figure that out. But without even trying to tackle that since none of us are lawyers. But what we can look at is like, what does that, and even just for a moment, let's just kind of set aside the fact, because this is more tied to the legal of the family, whoever owns the literary trust of that person. But Jerrilee, what do you think about this idea of someone's been brought back to life with just their voice in some other context?
Well, it just like off the bat, it feels deeply immoral to me. And I think this is something that's going to be like a big issue going forward, honestly, morally. And this has come up a lot in terms of in the narration world where like narrators can sell their voice, which I think is like really dangerous, honestly, because that means that like people can make it seem like you've said anything and may or may not be easy to find the person who is saying the thing through your voice. So there's like some really sketchy things in there. Again, I think we come back to like the storytelling aspect. And in terms of like kind of coming back to like for authors, like if you're an author and you are playing with the idea of getting your narrated with AI, even if it is the voice of a narrator who has sold their voice to do this through AI, I don't feel like you're getting the quality that you could be. And part of that is there's like real genuine skill in storytelling, in like crafting sentences and like the emotions that go into storytelling. And, again, like maybe AI is going to improve in this area. So it sounds a little bit more dramatic in this point, like a little bit more sad at this point. But like, honestly, there is just so much nuance in the way that we speak and the way that we convey emotion that I don't think that you can outsource that. So there's like a moral piece to that. Mm-hmm. And then there's just like, there's this piece that I think is hard to talk about, which is sort of like energetic. Mm-hmm. And it sounds a little bit woo, but honestly, I don't really think it is. It's like a real thing that I feel. And I think all of us feel in terms of like, if you, okay, this is sort of like a little bit out of context, but it feels related. Like you call a company, maybe like customer support, and you think you're talking to a person, and then you realize that they're AI. There is something that just, I don't know, kind of snaps in me where I'm like, just get so annoyed. And it feels like I've been faked.
Yeah.
Like it feels wrong. So yeah, there's moral, energetic, and then just like in terms of the crafting, I just don't think like technically speaking, you're going to get the kind of experience, or the listeners aren't going to get the kind of experience that they could get. And going back to what Emily was saying, like you wrote your book for a reason, and like you have human experience that you've put into this, and feeling hopefully that you've put into your book.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's put their life and passion into their writing, deserves to have that same passion and energy put into the audiobook so that it can be conveyed well to the listeners, and so that they can also receive the energy that's been put into the book.
Yeah. I sort of picture it sort of like you take all this digital information of the voice, right? And you stick it in a blender, and and then you get the AI, you get the computer to rearrange it so that it comes out the way to read these sentences. And that just sounds, the concept of it, I totally agree with you. It just feels like morally wrong, not even just from the perspective of what you've just done to somebody's voice and story, but what you have just done to the listener, because you're doing that sort of deep fake of like, you think you're listening to a human being. And I know the argument then is, well, it's going to be so good that you won't even know the difference. And I contend that you will, whether you're conscious of it or not, that I understand. You may not be conscious of it, but I do think, just imagine the way in which I sometimes will think about it is, would you have the voice of a computer lull your child to sleep each night? I just, from the perspective of like, as a parent and the importance of that connection that we have with our children. And I think about, that human to human connection is so, I'm running out of words, but so essential to who we are as human beings. How can we hand that off?
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised actually if there is a physiological difference on how our bodies react, like to listening to something from a human versus.
That's a study.
Okay, who's going to fund the study? We need to know. We could do it to plants first. I just saw this amazing thing. You like play the flute to some plants and they stop and listen. It's crazy, but it's true. Like I've even seen it, like talking to the plants in the garden, and like Brooke, don't grab the plant and rip it out of the ground. And it looks like it's shriveling up in fear. Like I'm not joking. It like one of my flowers is like, please don't rip me up, little baby. But it would be interesting, right? Like how does it affect like our cells? Like how does it affect because it is artificial, and I think intuitively our bodies probably respond to that.
I think that is such an that's the study I want someone to do. We can't fund it right now, but but I think that is definitely something we should do. And then just before we take a short break, I also want to touch on some ways in which some people have suggested that AI in narration can be useful. And that is, let's say, for example, somebody a narrator has narrated a project and then either their voice has changed or, maybe they've gotten very ill or something and they need like one correction done in a book. This to me feels like, okay, I could accept that because we're not just doing the whole thing. It's a moment. It's a blip. That would feel that. Any other thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have done that, and it's a very rare situation, but I think in terms of just like aiding, there's a part of the process where after a narrator has recorded the full audiobook, there may be corrections that need to be changed, things like they, mispronounced a word, whatever it is. And we have had instances of working with, say, a narrator who's, had to change studio, or just like the way that they've recorded the pickups doesn't match the original audio. So sometimes we have to do a little bit of have a little bit of extra help with making it like the tiny piece, the end of the T
right.
go in, so it sounds like a complete word, which is so hard to get from an extra recording session and is a skill in and of itself in terms of being able to match your own pacing and everything. So
yeah. And especially when in those moments where something has changed from when it was originally recorded, like the studio where they recorded is no longer available or the equipment is no longer available. And all of those things do impact the sound. So, Emily, anything you wanted to add?
Just that to me, though, is such a surgical and precise use of it. That's not replacing the storytelling. It's like, and in a way, it might even take more effort than it would. Like, it's sort of a last ditch scenario, to surgically apply the T at the end of the word. But it would be much more preferable if their scenario hadn't changed. We know that sometimes narrators will go through something traumatic, like lose their house in a fire, So it would have been preferable for them to have the same scenario or, studio, everything the way it was. And I totally agree. In a rescue operation, for the smallest little details to be perfect, which we really care about in our company, is like attaining that excellent sound and continuity throughout. Yeah. That doesn't seem bad. I was also going to bring up the AI tool we use for screening and finding those corrections. What do we think about that? I think we all love this tool.
Yeah. And we're not replacing an audio engineer either. We're using it as an additional layer to assist in the finding of, incorrect words, which sometimes, as anyone who is a writer knows, you can go through like 8 edits and a couple layers of proofread, and you still will miss stuff. So it can be helpful to have that tool as well.
Well, yeah, it's not replacing any jobs really. It's because we still like you say, it's just an extra layer. We still have an audio engineer. We still have the author review everything. So it's really just a flagging tool. And then, the team and the author will still be able to say yes or no, I do want that corrected, or I don't want that corrected, or that wasn't a necessary flag. We have a lot of those too. So it's just, I think.
And if we did rely on it in place of an engineer or an editor or somebody along the lines, we would end up with mistakes still, because sometimes it catches way too many things, or maybe it misses something that you would only catch as a human who's listening, because we are listening through it with the editor of like, well, that expression wasn't appropriate for what the word said. The AI is never going to catch that. Like saying, oh, he whispered this to the girl or whatever. Yeah. Like it's not going to catch that they weren't whispering or something, but that's what us as humans can tune into and say, well, maybe we can do that take differently.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's just take a short pause. We'll come right back and jump into talking about how we feel about AI participating in the writing of the audiobooks that we're going to produce. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kinda pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. So, Emily, you brought up this, you sort of turned the conversation in this direction earlier on. I would love for you to ask that question again about how we feel about it.
Well, it's an interesting one. As everyone who's ever attempted to write a book knows, it's a laborious, painful process with, times of inspiration and joy. But gosh, wouldn't it be nice to just have the idea and not do any of the work? I don't know. And how do we even screen for this? Or does it become apparent when a narrator tries to read a book that's been not written by a human? I don't think we've encountered this more than, have we?
I think, as far as I know, and Jerrilee can chime in, certainly if, especially if I have this wrong, but I think that it's only come up recently that an author has mentioned that in doing some additional material to the original manuscript, that they used AI in that process.
Yeah. This kind of was the main spur for having a lot of this conversation around AI writing, because it kind of made us question, like, did this person write the whole book with it? Like how much was involved? And especially for books that are nonfiction, that have a certain kind of content that is supposed to help lead people in a certain direction. But yeah, there's a big question about how much AI has participated in the writing.
Yeah. And I recently interviewed on this podcast Dan Miller, who was talking about AI and copyrights. And one of the things that he touched on was that the platforms such as Amazon are now requiring that you identify material that has been AI generated, which is basically AI generated it and maybe you made some edits. And the other is AI assisted, which is more along the lines of you wrote it and then you used AI to help you make it a little bit better. So that could be even like spell check, which we have all been using for many years now, but often we'll go a little deeper than that, like suggesting reconstructing sentences and things like that. But the author always having, of course, the final say. Yeah, AI hasn't taken over in that regard yet. It's like, no, you can't do that.
It's my book, not yours.
That's right. I wrote this book.
Yeah.
So I think I know this may be slightly veering off course a little bit, but I don't know if you talked about this in your other episode or interview, but the dangers of using AI, like uploading your manuscript to ChatGPT and maybe some of the other generative platforms, that if you do it in a particular way, or and will say I'm not super familiar with how to do it right versus wrong. But I know if you are not careful, that you can lose the rights to your own manuscript. And I've heard of horror stories where people are infringing on copyright law on their own manuscript. So
yeah.
Be warned.
There are, what I have learned more recently in, events that I've gone to, is that you can adjust settings to have the AI not train on your material. And there are, I think I don't know if it actually exists yet or if it's in the works, where you can have a closed system where it is only training on your material, nothing else, which would be a whole different, I think, version of AI use. But yeah, it's a tricky thing. So one of the things that we have to pay attention to is when we have clients who may be using AI but aren't aware of the laws and controversies around the use of AI in their manuscript, is trying to provide some appropriate guidance and parameters, okay, well, if you've used AI, then we probably need to include that in the closing credits, for example, and to be clear about, was it AI assisted? Was it AI generated and I think as you mentioned, that whole question of, I think Emily, you asked that question of, if it was generated by AI, not just assisted, but generated, how does that impact what we then record? Interesting question.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting to me is that the moment we were looking at this extra content that was created outside of the book, that question came up of, is this generated? Because we can tell, Mm-hmm. There is a part where you can tell. So even if it gets better and better, I think there will always be that question. And I do appreciate that there's going to be those requirements of labeling things as AI generated. I think it's so important that people know, because I do feel cheated if something's AI. Like you were saying, Jerrilee, of being on support and you think it's a person for a second and then you realize it's not. And you just feel cheated, because what is up with that? All we want is to connect with someone and to know we're being heard. And I'm struggling, please help me. And it's we don't care that much. That's how I feel. Yeah. Whenever AI is used, is I don't actually care about putting in my blood, sweat, and tears into whatever project I'm working on. I would rather outsource this because I don't care that much. Or I'm not capable,
Right.
And so it's tempting to get that help in the easiest way possible. And maybe sometimes it's appropriate. And I really learned a lot from you, Becky, with that conversation. And what is that distinction of AI assisted or AI generated? And I think these are the terms that are just going to be in everyone's vocabulary, or already is, and I'm behind, I don't know. But having that really clear distinction is so important, because then we've been more clearly able to decide, well, this is where we draw the line.
Right.
We're not going to produce something that's been AI generated. Right. That doesn't align with our core values of real people and authenticity and artistry. But we almost can't escape AI assist.
Right. Right. And some of the interesting things that are, that come if you have an AI generated manuscript is we don't know if the author is actually, especially with nonfiction, like you mentioned, Jerrilee, we don't actually know if the facts have been double checked. And AI comes out with lots of just complete bogus. So
I would say it's tricky too, because it's not like we're verifying the facts for other, even if it's all human written, we can't. It's not our job to go and verify, like, are these health facts like actually helping people?
Right.
Yeah, I think the question is not really like, is it good and true, but like, is it genuine? Is it genuine? Is it authentic? Yeah. Is it human? I guess.
Because there's even a free speech aspect to that. And this is something that we wrestled with, some years ago and talking about, well, okay, we may not agree with what's in this book, but that doesn't mean we're the arbiter or should be the arbiter of whether or not it goes out into the world. It's already out in the world in some way. We have reserved the right when we are presented with material that feels in some way oppressive or harmful or hateful to say, no, we don't want to participate in that. But we're not also going and trying to ban that material. Yeah, we disagree with it. We don't think it should, but free speech is an important, fundamental, foundational, constitutional right.
Yeah, I think it was so important to have that conversation and decide where our lines are with material that we want to help promote and support and material that we don't want to help promote, support. And I think just having that line of like, do we feel that this content could be harmful in some way has kind of helped us draw that line, and is also, of course, still nebulous. I think it's a question that we still need to ask in relation with AI. And I think the harder piece to know is like, who else that we don't know is this harming, because AI is training on a vast amount of material that's already out in the world, and we don't know who it's stealing from. It's the same thing that comes up with, visual art and that kind of thing, it's
all the arts.
Yeah. So like in many ways, like it is ripping off many people. And so it's like if you are generating content from AI, you are essentially stealing an amalgamation of different content. On the other side of the coin, I guess, is that like, in writing, in being a human, that is also what we're doing, that like we are necessarily influenced by everything we've read, heard, seen, and so again, like what is the question? Yeah.
But I would argue that's also intrinsically part of being human. Like the things that we are absorbing in our own experience and then come out of us in a new way, that's still intrinsically human. We couldn't possibly be exposed to, and we are more and more than we've ever been with this digital age, but AI is still pulling from more influences than we could ever naturally encounter. So I think it is still different because, of course, we reflect the things we've experienced or heard, but that's still our experience.
Yeah. I just had a metaphor just popped into my head as you were describing that, because, how much we could naturally be exposed to. And it's already like massively so much more than it used to be even a couple of decades ago, right? And then what occurred to me was, how in pharmaceuticals, a lot of what they'll do is they'll take what in a small amount would be perfectly safe, right? And then they'll just massively concentrate that one element and provide it as either a medicine or anyway. But the impact is so different and sometimes harmful, has nasty side effects. And I think there's kind of an interesting...
That is interesting. Like, what is it? Willow bark is aspirin. And so, yeah, that's kind of an interesting point. or like Valium comes from Valyrian root originally, but creating this like synthetic or like concentrated version of it. Yeah, it's like so much more of it than we would naturally.
Right. Then you get these negative side effects.
Right.
Potential.
This has also kind of made me think it's pulling from different things. So like thinking about, so AI is pulling from everything on the internet, essentially. And it's not pulling from we have other influences, like thinking about the time that, we're like sitting outside on a park bench and like, what are the things that we're pulling from there? Like the like sounds and feelings and everything. So there's a different set of influences in being human that we're pulling from, which is obviously also influenced by the internet. There are, a lot of similar sources from AI, but there is, I think about like the AI overview when I go to Google something that it's pulling from like a range of things that people have written on the internet. And we don't really know, and maybe there's a way to find the sources for all of those, but I don't know, actually not sure if that's possible.
Yeah. It does give sources sometimes with that, but it's still, you make a point that it can't give you that other realm of influence that comes from being in the real world.
That kind of grounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. And just to go back to like the narrators as well, of like delivering them something that's been totally AI generated or whatever, that would almost feel disrespectful to me for them. Like, because part of when we had that free speech conversation of like content we don't necessarily like, but also someone has their right to put it out in the world. I always felt too that if a narrator is given that freedom of choice as well, they're not under contract with us they have to record anything we give them. We tell them as much as we can, like, this is what this is about. And then if they're interested in expressing that, that's great. Them having that freedom to say, I connect with this content. I want to bring it out into the world. I'm excited about it. Like, awesome. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. But to give them something, not so much about the content itself, but who created it. Like, can you please infuse the human spirit into this robotic, unnatural thing? Like, what are you even asking me to do? It's almost akin to like, sometimes they've received a manuscript and it wasn't edited. They're like, what do you want me to do with this?
Right.
So I would be curious to know the experience of a narrator who may have been approached with something that was definitely AI generated and how that affects them trying to do their job.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I'm reminded of a conversation, another previous episode, and I would encourage anyone interested in this conversation to go back and listen to the episode with Matt Strain, who worked for, I think, decades at Adobe, and now does talk about AI for authors and how authors can utilize that as a tool appropriately. But one of the things that he said I loved, which was, he said his daughter is a writer. And she was expressing to him, and he agreed, that you could take the exact same paragraph of text, one that was generated by AI and one that was written and struggled with, by a human, the exact same words, and that they would be different because the one that the human wrote had as a part of its being the struggle of the human, that whole process. It feels like a really grounded comment, that we have, we can get all excited about the shiny new, and it's not really new, but AI is not new, but it's certainly in the spotlight right now. And we can get all excited about the cool things that it can do, but we must remember who we are as real people. And so to appropriately, thoughtfully, consciously engage with the technology without forgetting our grounding of who we are as real people.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll call it a wrap there. Again, Jerrilee Geist, our Director of Production, Emily Busbee, our Director of Marketing Services. Thanks so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Yeah, so fun to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.